Welcome to Taking the Higher Road, a special show dedicated to the trucking industry, specifically at the confluence of recruiting, retention, and compliance. In the fourth year as the host of this show, I bring over 2 decades of industry experience, both on the carrier side as well as the vendor side. And each week I interview industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insight to the driver lifecycle as we discuss the industry's greatest challenges. I always appreciate your feedback, good or bad. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review. I'd also like to thank and highlight the show's valuable sponsors. Their dedication and commitment to the industry and to the show is greatly appreciated. If you're interested in being a sponsor of the show or joining me for an interview, please email Jeremy at takingthehigherroad.com. Now, this week I'm joined by an industry leader who's helping companies operate more efficiently, which is especially important in this environment. Chad Crotty, VP of Sales for DDC FPO North America. Great to see you again, Chad.
Thanks, Jeremy. Nice to see you too.
We recently had the chance to spend some time together at the National Tank Truck Carriers Conference in Vegas. That was fun.
It was a great time.
I'm excited to.
Great hotel.
Well, yeah, it was beautiful. It was Fontainebleau, beautiful, brand new place. Yeah, I think I think it just opened a couple months ago, so that was really that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, for one, I'm excited just to learn more about you and your background and what attracted you to the trucking industry and really what's kept you going at DDC FPO for the past 13 plus years. I love how committed DDC FPO is to the industry. I see you at nearly every event, always active, always engaged. I'm hoping you can also shed more light on the company, its background, what you do, and how you're helping fleets today. Think we can get to all that during the show?
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely.
Well, as you probably know, I generally start every conversation with a book recommendation. So is there anything that you might share with the audience, a book that's that you've read that's been impactful?
Yeah, so I tend to gravitate to history or historical fiction. I'd say probably one of my top 3 books that I've ever read is a book called Endurance, which is about Ernest Shackleton's trip to Antarctica. Have you read this book?
No, but it's not fiction, is it?
No, it's not. It's based on true events.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, but there's fictional aspects to it, but it was a historical event that happened. So the book is about he's down in Antarctica and he's trying to traverse across the ice. So they took the ship down there. Their ship ended up getting enclosed in ice and then crushed, and they were left there. This is in the early 1900s. So they get stuck there. They had as much gear as they could pull off the ship before the ship sunk. They had sled dogs that they ended up having to eat to stay alive. They were hopping from one iceberg to the next, and everybody survived except for the dogs. All the humans survived, and it was a pretty harrowing story.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard what a great, it's a highly rated book too.
Yeah,
probably pretty inspirational. It's what I gather.
You think you have bad days.
It's all relative.
Try getting chased by a leopard seal and having to eat your dogs.
Yeah, the only leopard seal you see is at the zoo. That's perfectly fine with me. I don't even know if I've even seen one before. But thank you for that. I know it's already on my Goodreads list. So for those in the audience, if you've read it, awesome. If you haven't, I think that sounds like a good one to add. Let's learn more about Chad though first before we dive into DDC FPO. Can you share a little bit about your journey into trucking and then specifically, what took you to DDC FPO?
Sure. Yeah. So it started for me when I was a little kid. My dad was a sales manager for a regional trucking company in Illinois. And he was a member of a local transportation club. So I would go and my dad would hire me to help out and help run these events with him. And I got to meet a lot of people from the transportation industry. He had hopped around a few different regional carriers, but that was kind of where I cut my teeth. And I had been casually involved in transportation and logistics, but about 13 years ago, I ended up getting an opportunity with the company that I'm with now, DDC FPO, and it wasn't necessarily, it's a BPO, which is a business process outsourcing company. So we would be considered a vendor to transportation companies. So service provider, we create solutions to help streamline processes and things like that. But um, as it turned out, the work that we do is specifically for transportation and logistics, and it's the biggest part of our business. So when I started, I met the CEO. At that time, we were still kind of early stages with our first freight customers, our first LTL customers that we were working with. Prior to that, DDC has been around for 30 plus years as a data capture company. So DDC stands for direct data capture. FPO stands for freight process outsourcing. So I'm going to give you guys a rundown on all these acronyms. But anyway, so we started getting involved in transportation logistics mainly because, as you probably well know, it's a very archaic industry. It's heavily laden in paperwork. And us being a data capture company, it was ripe for opportunity for us to try and automate processes where we can, streamline, create efficiencies, drive down cost, things like that. So that's kind of from the early stages on. I came in about 13 years ago. I've been in sales for most of my adult life, sales, marketing, business development. So the CEO asked if I'd come and help expand our freight operations and build our client base. So that's where it all started. Today, we process about a third of all the LTL shipments in North America. So there's not a whole lot we haven't seen. And we're moving as quickly as possible to automating as much as we can to take out those manual processes. So that's where we are today.
Well, you talked about archaic. Yeah, I got into this industry 20 years ago and a little over 20 years ago. And I feel like, I mean, we've made strides, but I mean, compared to other industries, more innovative and progressive industries, I mean, we are in the Stone Ages in some areas. And certainly some of the stuff that I know that we'll get into, there's some legacy systems that you're just, the cost to change is so great. This is just what you're going to continue to use forever. But there's going to be a lot to unpack. I'm excited about that because, as I said at the top, especially right now, I feel like companies, if they can operate more efficiently and save money, ears are perking up because we're still mired in this, what has been going on now for close to 2 years, where everyone is like, where is the light? Where is the light at the end of this tunnel? So if I know you touched on DDC FPO quite a bit, but I'm not sure if the audience is as familiar as I am. Just so you mentioned, being around 35, plus years. Just any more background you want to share before we get into sort of the meat of our conversation?
Yeah, sure. So DDC FPO is a subsidiary of the DDC Group, which is a global group of onshore, nearshore, and offshore companies. So we leverage both, labor arbitrage, so offshore labor and technology to streamline processes, to build a more robust business continuity and disaster recovery plan, to leverage cost savings in other parts of the world. And we don't just work within transportation logistics. We have divisions in utilities, accounting and finance, multilingual processing, customer care, and also in IT. So if you need programming support, that's another area where we specialize in. We either have teams already established, or we can recruit for those resources if they're needed. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, I believe.
Yeah, well, and especially because, as you probably know, viewers of this show are all too familiar with the driver shortage narrative, right? We've been talking about that for, most of the 20 years I've been in the industry, as well as the technician narrative. But given, DDC's FBO area focus, are there any other workforce shortages that you're seeing in the market that maybe aren't as top of mind as those ones are?
Yeah, well, I can tell you from the first day I started, the first conference I went to 13 years ago, the driver shortage was top of everyone's mind, and it still continues to be. I wasn't as familiar with the technician shortage, but I recognize that that's probably an area where it's hard to backfill resources as well. But one area that we've seen, and it's just from all the conversations that we have with carriers every day, is IT is another area where it's hard to find qualified people at a reasonable price, because some of the stuff they do, there's integration work that has to happen. There's updates and system monitoring. You're also dealing with things like ransomware attacks and things like that happen on a regular basis now. So we saw that as an opportunity to kind of help build out our IT outsourcing division and help support the industry that way.
Now, this is a big deal. I didn't realize it until fairly recently. I didn't realize how big of a deal this really is. And I wasn't, there's terminology that hopefully you can educate me on, because like I've heard the terminology RPG programmers is something that I wasn't even familiar with that. But then because I didn't operate in, we're talking some legacy systems, right? AS400, the IBM, is it IBM I think is what it's called?
Yep. That's a legacy system. So if you think of the difference between systems, a legacy system would be like a green screen where you have to you use your tab key to move from one field to the next, and then you data enter that and then move on to the next field. A lot of systems that have been built in the last 20 years use more of a graphic user interface. It's called a GUI system, which is a Windows-based system where you use a mouse to go drag around and click on drop-down menus and navigate around screen. But a lot of, I'd say, medium to large size carriers, and it's not just specific to the carriers. There's other industries. Starbucks still uses the AS400. Costco still uses the AS400. There's other large companies out there that are using this, because essentially what it is it's a database. And these companies started with this 30, 40 years ago. IBM built the system in 1959, and it was adopted early on. And then as these companies grew, it still to this day is the backbone of their business. And they've bolted on services and applications and features and functionality to speak to the system, to pull data from the system, and to help run their business more efficiently. But the AS400 system is still historically a very old but stable system. It's very hard to hack. It's very reliable. So that's a lot of the reason why these carriers have stuck with it, because they can rely upon it.
Well, what are companies going to do though in this environment where, especially if they're seeing, shortages in that area? I would imagine RPG programmers, for example, if they are sort of phasing out, retiring, aging out of the industry, they've got to be replaced, because that's a specialty.
It is a specialty, yeah. So, and I don't know if I said it, but RPG stands for Reports Program Generator. So it's a very old programming language. It's not sexy. It's not like, Ruby on Rails or JavaScript or .NET or C#.
Python. I don't know.
Yes, that's another one. So, these kids that are coming out of school, they're not going through an RPG training program. So it's hard to backfill. And one of the things that we noticed in talking with carriers was they didn't have a backup plan in place. These programmers that they've had have been with them for their entire career, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. And what they were faced with was these people are either at retirement age or very close or going to be retiring in the next year or two, and they have no backup plan. There's no backfill of resources coming in. The other problem is, and not everybody's this way, but a lot of carriers don't have well-documented processes on changes and updates that they've done to the system. So the knowledge resides with that retiree.
In their noggin?
Yes. Yeah. So, you can understand why that would be a real problem moving forward. Those are things that we look at when we're consulting with carriers on how we can help drive more efficiency and create solutions that are going to help solve a problem, not just now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
So is one of the solutions potentially outsourcing that functionality, or is it recruiting to backfill, or both?
So we recognize that it is difficult to find those training resources, young college kids coming out of school. So after talking with a bunch of industry experts and kind of circling the wagons internally, we came up with a plan to go ahead and build our own training program. We wrote and established our own curriculum with, quizzes and tests and all that. We would pick candidates that had a good head on their shoulders. Maybe they already have a programming background, and we operate offshore, so a lot of these resources would be in the Philippines, just because of the low cost to find these types of resources. We would handpick the candidates, put them through our RPG training program that's specific to LTL. So they get hands-on training. Once they go through that program, then the idea is to have them placed and come in as a junior programmer working underneath these more seasoned teams of programs that they've had. The idea there is to transfer that knowledge then to the next generation, hopefully have some documented processes in place so you do have a good plan in the event that you decide to do something different down the road. Maybe a system comes along that makes a lot more sense. It just makes things a lot easier for them. But we started this last year. Our first class started their training program. They're just wrapping up graduation this month. So the idea is we do small groups of kids. We get them through, get them trained, get them placed, and then we kind of offset with another group following behind them. So every couple months, we'll have another group of kids coming out that I'll be trying to place.
And in the absence of working with you, that's got to be next to impossible for people to find that sort of specialty. It's got to be trained.
Yes. Yeah, it's all training. And what we did was we worked with carriers to help us build out that curriculum so that they would get the right kind of training that was specific to the need, right? So that's where that came from. And again, it was based on the fact that we saw one, an opportunity, but two, we saw a problem, not just now, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Now, I would imagine that a lot of the folks that are regular viewers of this show operate in an AS400 or the IBM platform, I would expect.
A lot of the, I'd say, medium to large size companies are still on that system. Yeah. It's hard for them to move away from it because it is the backbone of their system. And all the carriers that I've spoken with, they've acknowledged that there's not really another system out there that is as reliable and it is as secure. These other systems, a lot of the GUI-based systems that I mentioned earlier, graphic user interface, those are Windows-based systems. Those are the systems that are getting hacked by ransomware providers. So it seems counterintuitive that these new systems, these new programming languages are the latest and the greatest, but they're also the most prone to getting hacked. This system that was built in 1959 is still incredibly reliable. So, and I'm not advocating for, sticking with this, but obviously if it works and it's secure, then it makes sense to be able to continue to have a support team to do the programming and monitoring necessary to keep it up and running.
Well, yeah, because without that, what's your alternative? You'd have to jettison that completely. What you have basically built your whole business around, as you said, the backbone, the brainstem, and then I think that's beyond daunting.
Yeah.
It's just, business continuity would suffer.
That's right. Yeah. And if you think about like making sausage, right, you can only pack so much in before something comes out the other side. And that's kind of a gross analogy, but that's what happens when you're trying to go through transition and migrating from one system to the next. You might think that you've got everything figured out, but something on the other end, whether it's on your database or on your financials or something ends up getting screwed up on the other side. And that's why you need those programming resources to help find where those holes are and fill them.
So what do you say to companies that, I imagine, as I said, probably a lot of the folks listening to this show, this is what they use, right? And I assume then that they have programmers on their team that likely are long in the tooth, as I think probably many of them have been around for a long time. What advice do you have for them for those programmers who are phasing out?
Well, you got to have a good backup plan, right? You've got to talk with vendors out there that understand that there is a potential issue with you've got an aging population and your programming resources. So if your long-term plan, even your short-term plan, is to continue down this path with the system, you better be sure that you've got a well-trained young programming group coming in to support those people that are going to be exiting. What happens is these programmers, these senior programmers, they realize that they're in demand, and so they drive very high rates. When they go into retirement and into a consultancy type situation, the rates are even higher. But then you're also beholden to them for their schedule, because they're not working 40 hours a week or whatever it is. They're working whenever they feel like it, when they're not golfing or when they're not, at the beach. So if you got a real problem, you need to have somebody who's right there, on time to get the job done.
Well, that's a really good point. And I didn't even think about it from that perspective, but I would say, for one, it sounds like it makes sense to have this thought process, have these conversations up front. Like if you can identify whether there's a gap today or even a future gap, it's probably recognizing that sooner than later is optimal. So then you can start thinking and talking about what you're going to do about it. Is that something you do? I mean, is that something that DDC FPO does, with just have that sort of conversation and kind of look at an entire operation and look for holes?
Yeah. So we there's no one size fits all. We'll go in and we take a consultative approach. We don't try and cram any solution or idea down anyone's throat. It's more, let's listen, because I get a lot more information when I'm listening than when I'm talking, right? So listen to what their issues are, and then try and craft a solution around how do we address that and put that fire out. Once we have that fire put out, then we can look at, okay, where else can we look to support your business and help you? Because that's the IT outsourcing piece is just one piece of where we can help.
Well, and again, at the top, I was referencing how active and engaged you are in the industry, and always at events, and that matters a lot to me. I do think that matters a lot to a lot of other, carriers and other industry stakeholders as well. People do business with people they know and trust, and I think it's important in this industry more than maybe any other that you behave that way, and as a result, I think a lot of opportunities come. And speaking of, I'm curious, before we go, how can the audience learn more and maybe even schedule a sort of a consultative conversation to see if there's a fit? Where would you recommend we send them?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. The easiest place is to go to our website, www.ddcfpo.com. There's a form you can fill out on what your needs are, what your request is. That would come through to our marketing team and then get dispersed to whoever the subject matter expert would be. So it could be me, it could be somebody else from our team, but that's a good place to start. It's also a great resource for educating yourself on what we do, how we support the industry. Yes, I am a road warrior. You probably would see me at a trade show near you at some point. So I'm around. I know a lot of people in the industry, but in terms of connecting with us, certainly go to the website and you'll be able to get a hold of me directly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Chad. I appreciate that you're one of the good guys, and I look forward to seeing you and your team a whole lot more throughout the year.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
And thanks for joining me for another episode of Taking the Higher Road. Stay tuned for the next episode, as I'm joined by Bill Skinner and Tim Cordula of Wisconsin-based Skinner Transfer. And once again, special thanks to the sponsors of the show. We really appreciate you. If you're interested in being a sponsor or joining me for an interview, please email Jeremy at takingthehighroad.com. Until next time, thank you for taking the high road.